Serafina did not hear the door open, but she felt the shift in the air, the way cold slipped through the room like a blade, and the way every voice in the hall dropped to nothing all at once. She had learned a long time ago that silence was never empty. Silence always meant something. And the silence that filled the Silver Hollow Great Hall on that particular morning meant that someone important had just walked in. She sat at the far end of the long wooden table, her fingers wrapped around a clay cup of herbal tea that had gone lukewarm. She did not turn her head toward the door. She did not need to. She had already placed herself in the room by sound. The fire cracking to her left, the footsteps of the kitchen girls coming and going through the side corridor, the low argument between two elder wolves near the window to her right. She had done this every morning since she was old enough to sit at a table without her father holding her hand. Her name was Serafina Voss, and she had been blind since the day she was born. Not dim-sighted, not partially limited, completely, fully, and permanently blind. There was no light in her world. There had never been. She had grown up in a world of sounds and textures and smells, and she had built herself a map of every place she lived in so carefully and so precisely that most people forgot, for minutes at a time, that she could not see them at all. The elder wolves near the window stopped arguing. One of them coughed. A chair scraped back. Serafina tightened her fingers around her cup and waited. She had been waiting for something bad since the night before, when she had heard her father's footsteps in the hall outside her bedroom. Slow, hesitant, the walk of a man carrying news he did not want to deliver. He had not knocked. He had stood outside her door for almost a full minute, and then walked away. She had lain awake in the dark that was always dark, her wolf restless beneath her skin, and told herself it was nothing. She was good at telling herself things were nothing. She had been practicing since childhood. The footsteps coming toward her now were different from her father's. They were measured and deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had never once in their life been uncertain about where they were going. She heard the weight of authority in them before she heard anything else. Serafina. It was Elder Mott's voice, dry, careful, the voice of a man who chose his words the way a person chose stones to cross a river, one at a time, testing each one before committing his weight. Elder, she said. The Alpha has called a general assembly. You are required to attend. She heard what he did not say. She had always been good at that too. When? She asked. Now. She set her cup down. She rose from the bench without reaching for the table edge, without hesitating, and she smoothed the front of her gray dress with both hands. She had pressed it herself the night before. It was the best thing she owned. She had not known she would need it today, but she had pressed it anyway, because she had learned that it cost nothing to be prepared for the worst. She followed Elder Mott through the hall. The great hall of Silver Hollow Pack was built to be impressive. She had heard people describe it. High timber ceilings, stone walls hung with old banners, a fireplace large enough to stand in. She navigated it by memory. 12 steps from the side door to the first column, 7 steps left to clear the edge of the long table, 4 steps forward to reach the open floor space where the pack assembled for announcements. She had walked this path so many times that she could have done it in her sleep. The hall was full. She could tell by the sound of it, the warm, compressed quality of air that happened when many bodies filled a space. She could hear breathing. She could hear the small sounds people made when they were pretending not to look at something. She could feel eyes on her like pressure against her skin. She stopped where she always stopped, at the left edge of the assembly floor, close enough to hear, without being close enough to be in anyone's way. She had learned that place too. The place where she was visible but not obstructive. The place where she could exist without inconveniencing anyone. Alpha Caden Vale's voice came from the front of the room, and it landed on her like cold water. I will not make this long, he said. He never made anything long. That was one of the first things Serafina had noticed about him when she was 16, and he was 20, and newly appointed Alpha after his father's injury. He spoke in straight lines, no decoration, no warmth. She had thought, at the time, that it was confidence. She had admired it. She had been very young. Serafina Voss. She kept her chin level. She kept her hands still at her sides. She had been saying her own name in her head since the night before, practicing the way she would hear it in public, so that it would not surprise her when it came. It still surprised her. Yes, Alpha, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. You are aware, he said, of the pack's position on members who cannot fulfill active roles. He was not asking. He was framing. He was building the shape of something in the air, and she could feel every person in the room watching it take form, and she kept her hands still, and her chin level, and she breathed. I am aware of the pack's policies, she said. A blind wolf cannot patrol, cannot hunt effectively, cannot contribute to pack defense. A pause, not hesitation, calculation. These are not personal assessments. They are practical realities. Serafina said nothing. She had learned that too. When to speak and when to let silence hold its shape, because sometimes words only gave other people more material to use. However, Caden said, and something in that word made the back of her neck go cold. The matter before us today is not one of policy. It is one of truth. She heard him move, the sound of boots on stone, crossing the floor slowly, deliberately, the way a person moved when they wanted the room to register each step. Last night, he said, I was informed that several of the pack's dried stores have gone missing from the lower supply room. Dried herbs, primarily. Medicinal supplies. She understood then. She understood exactly where this was going, and the understanding settled in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Heavy, certain, spreading. I did not take anything from the supply room, she said. Witnesses report seeing you near the supply room after the evening meal. I was near it. I was not in it. I went to the lower corridor to speak with Elder Bram's wife about a tincture she had asked me to prepare. I do that every week. Elder Bram's wife will confirm it. Elder Bram's wife, Caden said, and his voice held something that was not quite contempt but lived close to it, is 73 years old, and partially deaf. Then she heard me with what hearing she has. I am not difficult to identify by sound. There was a ripple through the assembled pack, not laughter, not quite. More like the sound a crowd makes when it is startled by unexpected firmness. Caden let the ripple settle. Then he said, the supplies are missing. The corridor was unsupervised. You were there. That does not mean I took them. No, he agreed. It does not. But it means we cannot account for them, and we cannot verify your account without a reliable witness. I am the witness, she said. I was there. I know what I did. Serafina. His voice dropped. Not in volume but in temperature. I am not accusing you. Then what are you doing? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I am informing the pack, he said, that under the circumstances, I find it necessary to remove your residential status from Silver Hollow territory, effective immediately. This is not a punishment. It is a precautionary measure, in the interest of pack security and resource protection. She heard the words. She heard all of them. She processed each one carefully, the way she processed everything, thoroughly, without rushing, without letting herself react before she had finished understanding. He was not saying she had done it. He was simply removing her. Because it was easier. Because she was already a loose piece, already inconvenient, already the thing the pack had never quite known what to do with, and this was a clean way to set the inconvenience down. You are exiling me, she said. I am removing your residential status. Those are the same thing. Another pause. You will be given supplies for 3 days. You will be escorted to the territory border. His voice carried no apology, no discomfort, nothing she could reach out and hold on to. This is my decision as Alpha, and it is final. Serafina stood very still. She felt the stone floor beneath her feet. She felt the weight of every person in the room, their stillness, their held breath, their careful avoidance of her face. She felt her own heartbeat, which was not racing. It was slow and measured and certain, the heartbeat of someone who had understood for a long time that this was always going to happen, in one form or another. She did not cry. She had decided, at some point in her childhood, that she would not cry in front of people who had not earned it. She turned to face the general direction of the room, the broad sweep of it, the assembled pack, and she said, clearly enough for all of them to hear, I did not take anything that was not mine. I have never taken anything from this pack that was not mine. I have cooked your meals and made your medicines and raised children that were not my children, and done it without complaint, and I am leaving because I have been told to leave. But I want every person in this room to know that I am leaving innocent. No one spoke. Not a single voice, not her father, who was somewhere in that room. She could place him by scent, near the right wall, and she could hear the particular quality of his silence, which was the silence of a man who was ashamed, but not ashamed enough. She dipped her chin. Not a bow. A simple acknowledgement that she was done. And then she turned, and she walked back across the hall the way she had come. 12 steps to the column, 7 steps left, 4 steps to the side door. She did not rush. She did not stumble. She did not touch the wall. She walked out the same way she had walked in, with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and she let the door close behind her, and then she was in the cold corridor, and the sound of the hall fell away, and she was alone. She pressed her back against the corridor wall, and closed her eyes inside her permanent dark, and she breathed. In, slowly, out, slowly. She stayed like that for exactly 60 seconds. She had counted. She always counted. It helped. Then she pushed off the wall, turned right, and walked toward her room to pack. She had been born into Silver Hollow Pack 20 years ago, on a cold night in early winter, to a mother named Clara Voss who had not survived the birth, and a father named Edmund Voss, who had loved his wife more than he would ever love anything else, and who had looked at his newborn daughter and not known what to do with her. Edmund was not a cruel man. Serafina had spent a long time understanding that. He was simply a limited one. He had been raised in a pack that measured value by strength and contribution and visible capability, and his daughter had been born with a condition that made every one of those measurements difficult, and he had not known how to love someone whose life would be harder than the life he had imagined for them. He had provided for her. He had made sure she was fed and clothed. He had taken her to healers when she was small, hoping. Serafina had understood this later, not bitterly but simply as fact, hoping that something could be done, that the blindness could be corrected, or reduced, or managed into something less total. When it could not, he had taken her home and handed her to the care of whoever was willing to give it, and he had done his best to be present at the meals they shared, and he had told her, on her 8th birthday, that she was a capable girl, and he was sure she would manage. She had managed. She had managed with more thoroughness and more stubbornness than anyone in Silver Hollow had expected, and she had done it mostly alone, because the alternatives, waiting for help, asking for accommodation, making herself smaller to make others more comfortable, had never sat right with her. She had learned to cook by standing in the kitchen every morning for 3 months, until the cook, an impatient woman named Greta, stopped shooing her away and started telling her what she was doing. She had learned the territory by walking every path until she had mapped it in her mind as clearly as any sighted wolf. She had learned to identify every plant in the pack's medicinal garden by smell and texture and the way the leaves moved in wind, and then she had learned what to do with each one, reading from books that Elder Bram had transcribed by hand in the raised lettering system that had been developed 2 decades ago by a blind scholar in the Southern Territories. She had made herself useful. She had made herself indispensable in the quiet ways, the ways no one celebrated publicly, but everyone relied on privately. And it had not been enough. She had known it would not be enough. Not because she was not capable, but because in Silver Hollow, as in most packs, capability was measured by what a person could do in the obvious and visible ways. How fast they ran, how well they fought, how clearly they could see the enemy coming. She could not do those things. She had known, from the time she was old enough to understand pack politics, that there would always be a ceiling above her. She had not thought the ceiling would descend this quickly. She packed her bag in 17 minutes. She had timed herself once, packing for a hypothetical departure, because she had understood on some level that she might need to leave quickly someday, and she had not wanted fear or hurry to slow her hands. She took her warmest clothes, her mother's walking stick, carved from ashwood, smooth with use, the only thing Clara Voss had left behind, 3 bags of dried herbs she had gathered herself from the territory edge, a small knife, a flint, and the leather pouch of coin she had earned from doing small tasks for the older pack members. She was ready before the escort arrived. She did not say goodbye to her father. She had gone to his door and stood outside it, listening, and she had heard him on the other side, his breathing, his stillness, the particular quality of a man who was awake and aware and choosing not to open the door. She had stood there for 10 seconds, and then she had walked away. The escort was a young wolf named Perry, who smelled of nervousness and kept several careful paces behind her the entire walk to the border. He did not speak, except once, near the tree line, when he said, "I'm sorry." She had nodded without turning around, because she believed he probably was, and because it was not his fault, and because being gracious had always cost her less than being cold. The border was marked by a row of carved stones and a shift in the air. The edge of pack territory always had a particular quality, a loosening, like the moment a held breath releases. She had felt it before when she walked the perimeter. She stepped over the stones. Perry stopped behind her. She did not look back. She had never been able to look back, technically, but she had always been careful not to do the equivalent. The turning of the face, the hesitation, the pause that meant she was waiting for something to call her back. Nothing called her back. She walked forward, her mother's stick in her right hand, tapping the ground in the steady rhythm she had used since she was 6 years old, and she moved into the open land beyond Silver Hollow's boundary and kept going, and the only sound was the wind in the trees, and her own footsteps, and the light, steady tap of ashwood against the cold earth. She did not know yet where she was going, but she knew how to walk. She had always known how to walk. She had been walking away from things her whole life. Now, for the first time, she was walking towards something. She did not know what it was yet, but her wolf, bruised and quiet beneath her skin, lifted its head as the pack scent faded behind them, and it did something it had not done in a very long time. It breathed. She walked until the morning light changed against her skin. She could not see it, but she could feel it, the way the air warmed in degrees when the sun climbed. She had walked east because the ground sloped that way, and walking downhill was easier on her knees, and because east led away from Silver Hollow, and that was all that mattered. She ate one of her dried portions at midday, sitting on a fallen log she found by touch, her stick propped against her knee, her ears cataloging the sounds around her. Birds, wind through the trees, the distant sound of water. There was a stream nearby. She filed the information away and kept moving. She thought about Caden Vale as she walked. Not with the soft, painful ache she might have expected. She thought about him the way she thought about cold weather or difficult terrain, as a condition she had moved through. She had known him for 4 years. She had, for a brief and embarrassing period when she was 17, admired him from the careful distance she maintained from everyone who occupied the upper ranks of the pack. She had heard people talk about his fairness, his decisiveness, his dedication to Silver Hollow's survival. She had believed them, more or less, because she had no direct reason not to. She had since revised that belief. A fair man, she thought, would not have removed her based on proximity and the absence of a reliable witness. A fair man would have waited. A fair man would have asked more questions. A fair man would have, at minimum, told her privately before making it a public event. He had not done any of those things, and she had stood in that hall and understood, with the clarity that came from having very little to hide behind, that fairness had not been the operating principle. Convenience had. She was convenient to remove. The question of the missing supplies had been convenient to assign to her, and so it had been done. She was not angry, exactly. Anger required a kind of energy she did not want to spend on him. She was simply clear. She understood now what she had not understood at 17, that she had been wrong about what kind of man he was. That was not a tragedy. That was information. She took the information and she walked, and the pack scent faded further behind her with every step, and the tightness in her chest, the one she had been carrying since she was old enough to understand her place in Silver Hollow, began, very slowly, to ease. By the time she made camp that first night, she had traveled further than she had ever traveled alone. She built a small fire by feel and instinct, something she had practiced in the Territory woods on quiet evenings when no one was watching, because she had understood early that the skills you developed in secret were the ones that saved you when the public world stopped cooperating. She sat beside her fire and listened to the forest around her, and her wolf sat with her, and neither of them was afraid. They were many things. They were tired, and they were uncertain, and they were freshly exiled from the only home they had ever known. But they were not afraid. That, Seraphina decided, counting the sound of the night, the crickets, the distant owl, the particular silence of trees standing in darkness, was a beginning. It was not the beginning she would have chosen, but she had learned long ago that the beginning you were given was not always the one you had imagined, and that the only sensible thing to do with a beginning was start. She pulled her mother's walking stick close, rested her fingers on its familiar surface, and she started. The second day was harder. Her feet, which were strong from years of walking the pack territory, were not accustomed to the kind of continuous travel the open land demanded, and by midday they ached in ways she catalogued carefully without sympathy. She adjusted her pace. She took shorter steps on uneven ground. She used her stick more actively, sweeping ahead in a wider arc, reading the terrain before she committed her weight to it. She found the stream she had heard the day before, and she refilled her water container and washed her face in the cold current, and she ate the second of her dried portions sitting on the bank with her feet in the shallow water. She did not know exactly where she was. She knew she had moved east and slightly north, and she knew from the quality of the soil and the kind of trees around her that she was in mixed woodland that was not territory marked. Neutral land, the buffer between pack holdings. She had heard Elder Bram talk about the neutral lands once, several years ago, explaining them to a group of younger pack members. He had said they were unpredictable. He had said you could walk for days in the neutral lands without meeting anyone, and then meet someone unexpected when you least wanted to. She packed her things and kept moving. The third day was when things went wrong. She had been moving through a section of the woodland where the undergrowth was thicker, the trees pressing closer together, the light, which she registered only as warmth and its absence, more blocked. She had been navigating carefully, her stick extended, reading the ground. She had been alert. She had been doing everything correctly. She did not hear them until they were very close. There were 3 of them. She knew by the footsteps, different weights, different cadences, all moving in the same direction, which was toward her. Her wolf rose up fast and hard inside her, not in aggression but in warning, and she stopped walking and turned to face the sound. "Look at that," one of them said. Male voice, young, with the particular edge of someone who had spent too much time in places without rules, traveling alone. "Looks lost," said another. "She's got supplies," said the third, and that one did not bother to soften the observation. She held her stick with both hands, not as a weapon, she had no illusions about that, but as a grounding point, something to hold on to while she thought. "I'm passing through," she said. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Good," said the first voice. "Because trouble's expensive, supplies aren't." She felt them move closer. She measured the distance by sound, and by the displacement of air that moving bodies created. 3 people, adult males, by the weight of their footsteps. She was one person, with a walking stick and no territorial protection. She did not let her hands shake. "I have food," she said. 3 portions. You can have them." She reached into her bag slowly, because she understood that sudden movements in situations like this created escalation, and she did not want escalation. "I am also blind, which means I cannot give you any useful description of you afterward, which means there is no practical reason for this to become complicated." There was a moment of silence. She had surprised them. She had intended to. She held out the food. A hand, rough, calloused, took it from her. There was a brief discussion she was not part of, too low to fully catch, and then the sound of footsteps retreating. They took her food. They left her everything else. She stood alone in the undergrowth for 2 full minutes, her hands at her sides, her stick touching the ground. Then she adjusted her bag and walked on, and she did not allow herself to think too hard about how wrong that could have gone, because thinking too hard about things that could have gone wrong was a habit she had worked for years to break. She had her herbs. She had her knife. She had her coin and her clothes and her mother's stick. She was cold and hungry, and she did not know where she was going. She kept walking. It was late afternoon when she smelled the wood smoke. Not a fire built for warmth in the open, but the deep, embedded smell of a structure that had housed fires for a long time. A chimney, a building. She turned toward it and slowed her pace, extending her stick, reading the ground change from soft earth to a narrow, compressed path that people walked regularly. She followed the path. The cottage announced itself first through the smell of it. Herbs, primarily, strong and various, the layered scent of a place where plants were grown and dried and used. Lavender, strongest. Underneath it, rosemary, yarrow, something sharper she could not immediately identify. Then the sound of it, a low, steady creak from somewhere above, what might have been a rocking chair on a porch. Then, finally, a voice. "Well," it said, "you look like you've had a time of it." The voice was old, female, dry with amusement rather than unkindness. Serafina stopped. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced," she said. I followed the path. Paths are for following, the old woman said. Come closer. You're too far away for a proper look. Serafina moved 3 steps forward along the path. She heard the creak of the chair settle, and then footsteps, slow and careful but not frail. The footsteps of someone who had been moving through this particular space for a very long time. You're blind, the woman said. Yes. And you've been walking for days. 3 days. Have you eaten? Serafina considered lying, and decided against it. Not today. The old woman made a sound that was not quite a sigh, and not quite a laugh, somewhere between the two. Come inside, she said. I'll heat something. You can sit by the fire and tell me what you're running from, or what you're running toward, and I'll decide whether to ask you to leave in the morning. Serafina stood at the edge of the path for just a moment. She had been raised to be careful. She had been raised in a world that had not always been kind to her, and caution was a habit she wore like a second skin. But she was cold and hungry, and she had traveled 3 days alone, and the cottage smelled of herbs and old fires, and something indefinably safe, the way certain places just did. She stepped forward. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, the old woman said, and Serafina heard the smile in it. I'm a difficult host. The door opened. The warmth hit her first, not the aggressive blast of heat, but the gentle, settled warmth of a space that was always warm, that had been warm for a very long time. She stepped inside, her stick finding the threshold, and she stood for a moment just inside the door, breathing. It smelled like the beginning of something. She could not have said why. She was tired and hungry, and her feet hurt, and she was standing in a stranger's cottage, in the neutral lands, with no plan, and no pack, and no clear future. But she breathed the air of that small, warm room, and something in her chest, something that had been clenched since she stood in the Silver Hollow Great Hall, and heard her residential status revoked by a man who had found her inconvenient. Something let go. Not everything. Not forever. But enough, for the moment, to continue. The old woman's name, she would learn in the next few minutes, was Marin. Her hands, when she pressed a warm bowl into Serafina's, were small and dry, and very sure of where they were going. Serafina sat by the fire and ate warm soup and said nothing for a while, and Marin sat across from her and also said nothing, and the fire cracked and the herbs hung drying from the rafters, and the evening settled around the cottage like a cloak. It was, Serafina thought, the first quiet she had felt in a very long time. She let herself have it. The first thing Marin said to her, after the soup and the silence, was not what she expected. Your wolf is silver. Serafina looked up, or turned her face upward, the habitual gesture she made in place of looking. You can see that? Not with my eyes, Marin said. With the other kind of looking. I've been doing it longer than you've been alive. A pause. The measured pause of someone choosing words carefully. Silver wolves are rare. I've only known 2 others in my entire life. I know, Serafina said. I've been told. What have you been told about them? She set her bowl down on her knee. That they're supposed to be significant, that the moon goddess marks them for something. She kept her voice level. I've heard it since I was old enough to understand it. I stopped putting weight on it a long time ago. Why? Because I grew up in a pack that was more interested in what I couldn't do than what the color of my wolf might mean. Significance is hard to argue for when you're being exiled for the convenience of someone who found you difficult to accommodate. Marin was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked. Who exiled you? She asked. The Alpha of Silver Hollow Pack. Caden Vale. Serafina's head turned sharply. You know him? I know of him. I know of most pack alphas in this region. It's useful to know things when you live at the edge of several territories. Another pause. He's young. He is. Young alphas often make decisions based on what is easy, rather than what is right, Marin said. It's not an excuse, it's an observation. I don't need it excused, Serafina said. I just need somewhere to go. The old woman was quiet again, for long enough that Serafina began to wonder if she had overstepped. She was, after all, a stranger in this woman's house, sitting by her fire, eating her soup. You can stay, Marin said finally. For now. You'll earn your keep. I have a large garden and old hands, and there is more work here than I can manage alone. A pause. I will teach you what I know about plants and medicines, and the particular arts I've spent 60 years learning. In return, You work. Do you have a problem with that? Serafina shook her head. No. Good. The creak of the rocking chair settling. Then we'll start in the morning. Sleep first. There's a room at the back. The door is directly across from where you're sitting. The bed is against the left wall. There's a water basin on the right. She stood. She crossed the room. She found the door exactly where Marin had said it would be, and the bed exactly where she had said, and the water basin exactly where she had said. And she stood in the small room in the dark and understood that this woman had given her directions, not as an accommodation, but as simple practical information, the way you would tell any person where the bed was. It was such a small thing. It should not have mattered as much as it did. She washed her face and lay down and pulled the blanket over herself, and she was asleep before she had time to think. She did not dream of Silver Hollow. She did not dream of her father's closed door, or Elder Mott's dry voice, or the cold stone floor of the great hall. She dreamed of a silver wolf running in open country, faster than anything, with the wind behind it and no walls anywhere in sight. She slept like someone who had finally, after a very long time, set down something heavy. Morning at Marin's cottage came with the smell of brewing tea, and the sound of a woman who did not waste time on slow starts. Serafina heard her before she was fully awake, moving in the kitchen, the sound of a kettle, the opening and closing of the back door, as cool morning air swept briefly through. She sat up, found her bearings in the small room as quickly as she did anywhere she had slept more than once, and dressed in the same clothes she had worn the day before, because she had not yet found a way to organize her bag in the unfamiliar space. "Tea's on the table," Marin called. She came out and sat down. She wrapped her hands around a cup and drank, and said nothing, while Marin moved around the kitchen, with the particular efficiency of someone who had done the same tasks, in the same space for decades. "The garden is behind the cottage," Marin said, after a while. "We'll go out when it's warmer. Tell me what you know." "About what?" "Plants. Start there." Serafina considered. "Warrow stops bleeding, and reduces fever. Lavender calms and aids sleep. Rosemary strengthens circulation, and clears the mind. Willow bark reduces pain and swelling. Elderflower is useful for infections of the chest. Comfrey heals bruising and bone damage when used correctly. Valerian root for deep sleep or severe anxiety." She paused. "I know approximately 60 plants by scent and texture. I can prepare most of them in 4 or 5 standard forms." Marin was quiet. 60, she said, eventually. "I may have missed some. I learned most of them from a transcribed guide and practical experience. I've been the pack's informal healer for about 3 years, though I was never given any official position." "Why not?" "Because giving an official position to a blind wolf did not suit the image the pack preferred to present." Another silence. This one had a different quality, not discomfort, but thought. "Go and get your boots on," Marin said. "We're starting early." The garden was larger than Serafina had expected, not wide, but deep, laid out in long rows with a central path, and cross paths at intervals, that Marin explained once, and expected her to remember. She did. She walked the paths 3 times, counting steps, noting the sound differences between the open sections and the areas where the overhanging herb bushes pressed closer, noting where the ground changed from packed earth to the softer, turned soil of active planting beds. "Tell me what you smell," Marin said. She stood at the garden's center and breathed. "The lavender is to my left, front section. Behind it, something more bitter. I think it's wormwood. To my right, front, thyme, and behind it, something that might be meadowsweet. Straight ahead, the smell changes. There's something in the back section that I don't know." "That's good," Marin said. "Better than I expected. The thing in the back is lemon balm. Do you know it? By description, not scent. I've never had access to it. You have access to it now." Marin moved, and Serafina followed the sound of her footsteps. A hand took her wrist, not roughly, and guided her fingers down to a cluster of leaves. "Feel." She felt. Slightly rough surface, oval shape, the edges gently serrated. She crushed one leaf gently between her fingers and brought it to her nose. Bright. Green, something that reminded her of lemons without being exactly lemons. "Lemon balm," she said. "Good. Now tell me what it's good for." "I don't know yet." "That's the correct answer," Marin said. "You don't know yet. That's why you're going to learn." She released her wrist. "It calms the nerves. soothes anxiety, useful for children who won't sleep, and for adults who carry too much in their minds. A pause. I suspect you'll find it personally relevant. Serafina almost smiled. I suspect so. They worked through the morning. Marin taught in the way that good teachers teach, by question more than statement, by asking Serafina to figure things out from what she already knew, by correcting errors without elaboration, and praising nothing, because praise interrupted the learning. Serafina worked in the way she had always worked, thoroughly, without complaint, with her full attention directed at the task in front of her. By midday her hands were dirty, and her back ached from bending over the planting beds, and she had learned the locations of 6 more plants she had not known by smell before, and she felt, in a way she had not felt in a long time, genuinely interested, not performing usefulness, not demonstrating capability for the benefit of a pack that would not acknowledge it anyway, actually interested. It was a different feeling from what she was used to, and she turned it over in her mind while she washed her hands at the outdoor basin, cataloging it the way she cataloged everything, carefully, without rushing to conclude. You learn fast, Marin said, from behind her. I've had to, Serafina said. That's different from being naturally fast, Marin said. What you have is better than natural speed. You learn to pay attention because your survival depended on it. That kind of attention doesn't go away. Serafina turned toward the sound of her voice. Are you teaching me? She asked. Or are you telling me something about myself? Both, Marin said. They're the same thing, most of the time. She dried her hands and went back inside, and she thought about that for the rest of the afternoon while she ground dried herbs with a stone mortar, working by feel and smell in the quiet of the cottage kitchen, with the autumn light, warm against the back of her neck through the open window, moving slowly across the afternoon. She did not think about Silver Hollow. She did not think about her father's closed door, or the way the hall had sounded when she walked out of it. She thought about lemon balm, and its calm green scent, and the shape of the garden mapped in her mind, and the particular quality of learning something true. It was enough. For the moment, it was more than enough. She was still there the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that. She was still there 6 weeks later, when the convoy arrived at the cottage door in the dark, and everything she had built inside herself since the exile began, the careful, patient architecture of a new beginning, was tested in ways she had not anticipated. But that was still ahead of her, and she did not know it yet. She only knew the garden, and the herbs, and the steady, demanding patience of a woman who asked questions instead of giving answers, and the gradual, quiet expansion of a life that had, until recently, been held in very small hands. She was learning to hold it differently now. She was learning to hold it open. The weeks at the cottage settled into a rhythm so natural that Serafina sometimes forgot, briefly, that she had not always been there. The rhythm of it was simple and complete. Up before dawn, fire started, tea on, garden by first light, work through until the afternoon, then the inside work, grinding and preparing and sorting and drying, the long, careful processes of making medicines that would actually work. Marin was rigorous in a way that no one in Silver Hollow's informal medicinal tradition had ever been, and Serafina absorbed the rigor the way dry ground absorbed water, completely, and with visible change. She learned that preparation mattered as much as ingredients, that temperature during drying changed what a herb could and could not do, that the part of the plant mattered, root versus leaf versus flower, and that each had different properties even on the same stem. She learned to taste things she had never tasted, to identify qualities through her tongue and the roof of her mouth that she had not previously known were relevant. She learned that her sense of smell, which had always been acute, could be trained further still, and she trained it systematically, the way she trained everything, with patience and repetition, and refusal to accept approximation. Marin watched all of this, and said very little about it. She taught when teaching was needed, and stepped back when it was not, and she did not make a production of Serafina's blindness in either direction. She neither accommodated it unnecessarily, nor pretended it was invisible. She simply worked around it in the direct, practical way of a person who found facts easier to deal with than feelings. This suited Serafina exactly. The cottage sat at the edge of Ironwood territory. Serafina had understood this from the first week, from the direction Marin's occasional visitors came from, and the way she spoke about the land around them. The Ironblood Kingdom was not a pack in the ordinary sense. It was a kingdom, the old kind, with a ruling alpha whose authority extended over multiple packs and territories, in a governing structure more complex than the single alpha model most packs used. Seraphina had grown up hearing its name at the edges of adult conversations, in the way children heard things adults did not intend for them, fragments that she had assembled into a rough understanding. The Alpha King was named Dorian Ashvale. He had come to power young, under difficult circumstances. The details varied depending on who was telling it, and he had built the Ironblood Kingdom into something formidable enough that no neighboring pack wanted to be on his wrong side. People spoke about him the way they spoke about weather, with a combination of respect and wariness, the recognition of something powerful that did not particularly care how you felt about it. Seraphina had filed this information and not thought much about it. She thought about it on the night of the convoy. She heard them well before they reached the door. The sound of many hooves on the packed earth road, the creak of wheels, the particular controlled cadence of a group that moved like a military unit rather than travelers. She had been asleep, and the sound pulled her up through the layers of sleep the way a hand pulling a thread pulled the whole cloth, and she was awake and sitting up before she fully knew why. She listened. The convoy stopped outside. She heard voices, low, urgent, the voice of people managing a situation. Someone was injured. She knew injury by the quality of the voices around it, that particular combination of efficiency and suppressed alarm that people used when they were trying to keep the situation contained. She heard Marin's door. The old woman moved through the cottage to the front, and Seraphina rose and followed without being asked, because instinct moved faster than decision when injury was involved. The front door opened. Cold air. The smell of horses, many of them, and wood smoke and cold metal, and beneath all of it, beneath everything else, the smell of blood. Marin. The voice was male, controlled, coming from a point about 4 feet above the ground, someone crouching beside another person. He's been cut. It's deep. He needs... Bring him in, Marin said. She stepped aside. Seraphina stepped aside with her. The sound of a body being carried, careful footsteps, more than one person, the grunt of coordinated effort. The smell of blood intensified as it passed her, and she moved on instinct, following it into the main room. On the table, Marin said. A pause, then the sound of a body being settled onto the wooden surface. Seraphina moved to the supply shelf without being told. She had been stocking it for weeks. She knew exactly where everything was. Her hands found the clean wrapping cloth first, then the yarrow preparation, then the bottle of high-proof spirits that Marin used for cleaning wounds. She brought them to the table. Left side? She asked. Yes, Marin said, without surprise. She had long since stopped being surprised by Seraphina's efficiency. Seraphina moved to the left side of the table and put her hands on the wound, gentle first, reading it by touch. Long and straight, deep but clean-edged. Not jagged, a sharp implement, not a fall or impact. It had been bleeding for some time but was slowing, not a vessel wound, muscle mostly. It needs stitching, she said. I know, Marin said. Stitch it. She had stitched wounds before. The pack's young warriors, the hunters who came back from territory runs with something that needed closing. She had done it by feel from the beginning, which had made the pack uncomfortable at first, but the wounds had closed cleanly, and the people had healed, and eventually, the discomfort had given way to grudging acknowledgement. She worked quickly, the way she always worked. No unnecessary motion, full attention on the task, the needle moving with the kind of precision that came from understanding exactly what she was doing rather than guessing. She could feel the room around her, the presence of several people, standing back, watchful. She counted 4 or 5 from the sounds of their breathing. She did not pay attention to them. The wound was what mattered. She finished, and tied off and sat back. Done, she said. The room was quiet. Then a voice said, from somewhere near the door, a different voice from the others, lower, quieter, with a kind of stillness in it that made her stop and listen even though nothing remarkable had been said yet. Who are you? She turned toward the voice. I'm Seraphina, she said. I live here. Who are you? A pause. It was not a hostile pause. It was the pause of someone who had asked a question and received an answer they were turning over carefully. Dorian Ashvale, the voice said. She did not react outwardly. She had been trained by years of composure under pressure. She processed the name, Alpha King of the Iron Blood Kingdom, the name that adults had said in certain tones for as long as she could remember, and she processed the fact that he was standing 4 feet to her left, and she kept her face neutral. "You're the injured man's Alpha," she said. "Yes." "He'll be fine," she said. "The wound is clean and closed. Keep it dry. Change the wrapping tomorrow, and apply this." She held out the preparation she had mixed while talking, twice daily, for 4 days. "Watch for redness spreading away from the edges. If that happens, come back." A moment of silence. "You prepared that while we were talking," he said. "I prepared it while I was stitching," she said. "I work better when I keep my hands occupied." He said nothing for a moment. She could feel the particular quality of the silence he made, not empty, not waiting, thinking. Then, "How long have you been doing this?" "Healing," she said. "Most of my life." "Who taught you?" "Mostly myself. And Marin. And 3 years of practical experience in a pack that needed a healer and didn't have one." "What pack?" She paused. "A small one. Further north." He did not push. She noted that. The not pushing. The willingness to accept a partial answer without pressing for the rest. "Thank you," he said, "for Kale." "You're welcome," she said, "for Kale." She heard him move, and then his footsteps stopped, and she had the strong impression of a person turning back, the particular half movement of a decision being reconsidered. But he did not speak again that night. She heard the convoy reorganize outside, heard voices she could not fully catch, heard the sound of horses and wheels beginning to move again, and then it was quiet. Marin came to stand beside her. "Well," the old woman said, in a tone that suggested she was choosing the most minimal word available. "What?" Serafina said. "Nothing," Marin said. "Wash your hands. I'll make tea." Serafina washed her hands and sat at the table in the dark after the warmth of the fire, and she thought about a voice that had asked who she was, rather than what she was, and she thought about the quality of the silence he made, and she filed all of it carefully. And then the tea came, and she drank it, and she went back to bed. But she did not sleep for a while. She lay in the dark that was always dark, and listened to the silence of the cottage, and the distant sound of the convoy moving away, and her wolf, which had been quiet and grieving for weeks now, tucked small and still behind her ribs, lifted its head, and made a sound like the first breath after a long, cold night. Serafina pressed her hand flat against her own chest, and held the feeling there. "Not yet," she said quietly, to no one in particular, or perhaps to herself, or perhaps to the wolf. Whatever was beginning, she did not want to rush it. She had learned, by now, to be patient with beginnings. He came back in the morning. Not the whole convoy, just him, and one other person who moved quietly and stayed near the door. She heard the knock before Marin did, and was already at the kettle, when the old woman opened the front door. "Alpha King," Marin said, with the relaxed composure of someone who was not easily unsettled by titles. "I would like to speak with Serafina," Dorian Ashvale said, "if she's willing." "She's in the kitchen," Marin said. "She'll tell you herself whether she's willing." Serafina set down the kettle. "Come in," she called. He entered. She heard him stop a few feet inside the kitchen doorway, not hesitating, but taking measure of the space in the way that powerful people sometimes did, cataloging a room before committing to it. She gestured to the bench on the far side of the table. "Sit, if you like. Tea?" "Please," he said. She poured 2 cups and set them on the table and sat down. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "How is Kale?" she asked. "Sleeping," he said. "The convoy is camped a mile down the road. He was more comfortable there than being moved." A pause. "You were right. The wound looks clean." "I'm usually right about wounds," she said. "It's one of the few areas where I feel confident making that statement." There was a brief silence, and she had the sense that he was almost, not quite, but almost, amused. "I want to ask you something," he said. "I gathered. My pack's head healer died 3 weeks ago." He said it directly, with no softening, the way he said everything. She was beginning to understand. "We are entering treaty season, a period when my household and the surrounding packs send delegations, which means a high volume of people moving through the keep, and a high likelihood of injuries, illnesses, and the usual complications of political gatherings. I need someone who knows what they're doing. Serafina waited. I'm offering you a position, he said. Head healer at Ironblood Keep. Residence, meals, a wage, full access to the medical stores. A pause. The position is real. The work will be significant. I'm not offering it out of charity. She was quiet for a moment. You watched me stitch a wound by feel in the middle of the night, she said. In a strange kitchen, on a person I had never met. That's the basis of this offer. That, and the fact that Marin speaks well of you, and the fact that my previous healer recommended, before he died, that I find someone who learned medicine by necessity, rather than by tradition, because people who learn by necessity tend to pay better attention. He picked up his cup. She heard him drink. You pay very good attention. I don't have the option of not paying attention, she said. No, he agreed, and that's exactly the point. She turned her cup in her hands. She was thinking, and she let herself think without hurrying, which she could do, because he did not seem like a person who needed to fill silence with words. I would need Marin's opinion, she said. I expected that. And I would need to understand clearly what the position involves. I'm not interested in being a healer in name, while someone else makes the decisions. No one else makes those decisions. That's what head healer means. Some people define it differently when the head healer is someone they find easy to override. I don't override medical decisions, he said. It's not an area where my authority improves outcomes. She considered this. It was, she thought, a remarkably sensible thing to say. I'll think about it, she said. All right. She heard him stand. She heard him set the cup back on the table, with a precision that spoke of someone accustomed to treating other people's things with care. How long have you been traveling? He asked, from the doorway. She blinked, slightly surprised. Since I left my pack, about 6 weeks ago. Where were you before that? Silver Hollow. A brief pause. I see, he said. And then, without elaborating on what he saw, I'll come back tomorrow for your answer. She heard him leave. She sat with her cup and thought. She thought for a long time, the way she thought about important things, not in a hurry, not toward a conclusion she had already decided on, but openly and carefully, the way you needed to think when the decision mattered. Marin appeared in the kitchen doorway. Well? He's offered me a position, Serafina said. I know. He asked me about you before he asked you. Marin moved to the opposite bench and sat. I told him the truth, that you are more capable than most healers I've known, that you learn with unusual speed, and that you've spent 20 years being underestimated by people who should have known better. Serafina was quiet for a moment. What do you think I should do? I think you know what you should do, Marin said. You wouldn't be sitting here this calmly, if you weren't already leaning in a particular direction. She turned her cup. I don't know anything about Ironblood Keep. No, but you didn't know anything about my cottage either, and you've managed. That's different. Is it? Marin's voice was dry, but not unkind. You walked 3 days from Silver Hollow, with no destination and no plan. You arrived here and built something from nothing. What makes Ironblood Keep more frightening than that? Serafina considered. He's an alpha king, she said. It's a different kind of power than I've dealt with. Power is power, Marin said. The kind that respects skill, and the kind that doesn't. Those are the only 2 categories that matter. Which one did he seem like to you? She thought about the question, and she thought about the way he had asked who she was, rather than what she was, and the way he had not pressed her about Silver Hollow, and the way he had said that his authority did not improve medical outcomes. The first kind, she said. Then you have your answer, Marin said. In the morning, when Dorian Ashvale came back and asked her again, she said yes. She packed her bag, more things now than before, because she had accumulated things in 6 weeks of a life that had room in it, and she said goodbye to Marin properly, which meant standing in the cottage doorway, while the old woman pressed 3 bundles of dried lemon balm into her hands. For the hard days, Marin said. You said it was for anxiety, and people who carry too much in their minds, Serafina said. Yes, Marin said. That's what I said. She held the bundles, and felt the familiar dry warmth of them, and she did not cry, but she stood in the doorway for 1 moment longer than she needed to. Thank you, she said. You thanked me the first night, Marin said. I told you not to. You also told me you were a difficult host. I am. You're the best teacher I've ever had, Serafina said. I'm choosing to say thank you for that, regardless of whether you want me to. A pause. Then the dry sound of the old woman's voice softened fractionally at its edges. Be careful. I'll be careful. Be useful. Always. And be yourself, Marin said. The full version, not the one you've been making smaller for other people's comfort. The full one. Serafina held the lemon balm bundles and breathed the bright, clean scent of them, and she turned and walked toward the waiting convoy, with her mother's stick in her hand, and her bag on her shoulder, and her wolf sitting up straight inside her, its silver coat shining in a darkness only they shared. The road to Ironblood Keep was long. She was ready for a long road. She had been walking long roads her whole life, and she was getting very good at them. The road to Ironblood Keep took 2 full days by convoy, which was faster than it would have taken on foot, but slow enough that Serafina had time to build a picture of the territory they were moving through, from the sounds and smells around her. She sat in the convoy's second wagon, beside Kale, the injured wolf, who was conscious and considerably more talkative than she had expected. He was young. She could tell by his voice, the particular quality of someone in their mid-20s, quick to speak and quicker to recover his confidence after each sentence. He had brown hair and a broken nose and a loud laugh, he told her, by way of describing himself, because she had not asked, but he had apparently decided she should know. Does it bother you? He asked, after about an hour. When people describe themselves to you like that? I wasn't sure if it was useful or if it was just, something people do because they don't know what else to do. It depends on how it's done, she said. The way you did it was fine. You were giving me information, not making a point of the fact that I can't see you. Good, he said. That was my intention. Sort of. I was also partly just nervous and talking. She almost smiled. I know. He told her about Ironblood Keep during the remainder of the trip, not in a systematic way, but in the way a person who loves their home describes it, circling back, correcting himself, adding details he had forgotten to include earlier. The keep was large, he said, built into the side of a ridge so that one wall was essentially the rock face itself. It had been there for a very long time, longer than any current pack could trace their lineage. The Alpha King's household occupied the upper floors, the working spaces. Training grounds, kitchens, healing wing, stores, were in the lower and outer sections. How many people? She asked. In the household? Maybe 40, including the regular guard. During treaty season, more. A lot more, sometimes. And the Alpha King lives there all year? He travels for governance. But yes, the keep is his home. Kale paused. He's different in person than people think. Different how? People think he's cold, and he's not warm exactly. He doesn't make a lot of small talk. But he's fair. He remembers things about people. If you're in his household, he knows who you are. Not just your name, who you are. A pause. He remembered that my mother was sick last winter, and asked me about it at the spring assembly. I hadn't mentioned it in months. She filed this. He remembered, she said. He always does. It's not a trick, he just pays attention. Kale shifted, and she heard the slight catch in his breath from the wound. He doesn't do anything without thinking about it first either. Some alphas react, he considers. It takes longer sometimes, but the outcomes are better. She thought about this for the rest of the journey. When the convoy stopped and Kale said, beside her, "We're here," she sat still for a moment and let the place come to her. The size of the sound around her, the way voices echoed off stone, the smell of many fires and cooked food, and the cold mineral scent of rock and high altitude. She could hear, very distantly, the sound of running water, a stream or river somewhere below the ridge. It was large, it felt large, not in a way that was immediately overwhelming, but in the way that a place felt when there was simply a great deal of it to understand. She climbed down from the wagon with her bag and her stick, and she stood in the courtyard of Ironblood Keep and let it settle into her. Footsteps coming toward her. A woman's voice, clear and practical. "You must be Serafina. I'm Helene. I manage the household. I'll show you the healing wing." "Thank you," Serafina said. "Could we also walk the main paths between here and the healing wing? I learn spaces by repetition, and I'll need a few passes before I'm independent. A brief pause. The pause of someone recalibrating their expectations. She knew the feeling of it. And then, of course. We'll take it slowly. They took it slowly. Helene walked her through the keep's ground level twice, narrating as they went, and then walked her through a third time without narrating, letting Serafina work through it herself. She made a few mistakes and corrected them. She asked one question. By the time they reached the healing wing, she had the broad architecture of the route in her mind. Not perfectly yet, but with enough clarity that she was not walking without a map, which was what mattered. The healing wing was 4 rooms: the main treatment room, which was large, a supply room off the left side, a smaller room at the back for patients who needed to stay overnight, and a workroom where preparations were made. Serafina walked each of them slowly and thoroughly. She found the supply store and spent an hour going through it, identifying by smell and touch what was there, what was missing, what was incorrectly stored, what was past its useful point. She made a mental inventory that was longer than she had expected to need. Then she sat in the workroom and thought about where to start. She started with the incorrectly stored items, because poor storage was the fastest way to lose the value of a medicine. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, reorganizing the supply room in a way that made sense not just to her, but to anyone who might need to work in it. Labeling containers in the raised letter system she had learned from Elder Bram's transcriptions, setting up a clear order that moved from most to least frequently used. Helene came by at some point and stood in the doorway. "How is it?" she said. "Workable," Serafina said. "It will be better in a week." "The previous healer was here for 11 years, Helene said, not critically, just noting. "I don't need to be here 11 years to organize a supply room," Serafina said. "I just need it to make sense." Another recalibration pause. Then, "Dinner is in the main hall at the 7th bell. You don't have to come the first night if you'd rather." "I'll come," Serafina said. "I need to learn where the hall is anyway." She came. She sat at the long table with the household members and ate quietly, and listened to everything. The dynamics of the table. Who sat near whom. Who spoke loudly, and who spoke under the noise. Who was at ease, and who was performing ease. She catalogued it all with the thoroughness she brought to everything. Dorian Ashvale sat at the head of the table. She could tell by the way silence organized itself around him, even in the context of a noisy meal. Not an oppressive silence, just the natural orientation of a room around its center of gravity. He did not speak much. When he spoke, people listened, not from fear, but from attention. He spoke to her once, briefly, near the end of the meal. "How is the wing?" "In progress," she said. "What do you need?" She had a list. She gave it without preamble. Specific items. Specific quantities. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Helene will arrange it tomorrow," and that was the end of the conversation. She went back to the healing wing after dinner and worked for another hour, and then she went to her room, a real room, with a real bed, and a window she could hear wind through, and a door that locked, and she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. She was in Ironblood Keep. She was the head healer of Ironblood Keep. She had a position, and a room, and work that was real and meaningful, and would be fully hers. She thought about Silver Hollow. She thought about the stone floor of the great hall, and the sound of her own footsteps walking out. Then she set it down, the way she had been learning to set things down, not forget them. She had found that forgetting was not available to her in the way some people seemed able to forget. But set them aside, let them have the weight they had, without giving them more. She lay down and closed her eyes in the dark. Outside, Ironblood Keep moved through its evening, guards on the upper walls, kitchen fires being banked, distant voices calling good nights. The sound of a place that was alive and functioning, that had been alive and functioning for a long time, that would continue to be alive and functioning long after she fell asleep. She slept. In the morning, she started again. The first 3 weeks at Ironblood Keep were almost entirely about learning. Serafina treated this the same way she treated everything, as a problem to be solved through thorough and systematic effort. She learned the keep's geography by walking it in sections, spending an hour each morning on a different area until the whole thing was mapped. She learned the household's medical history by going through the previous healer's records, which Helene had preserved in stacked leather folders. She had them read aloud to her by a young household member named Owen, who had a clear voice and read without commentary, which she appreciated. She learned the personalities by sitting in the main hall at meals, and by the steady stream of people who began, within the first week, to find their way to the healing wing, with one thing or another: a cut that needed looking at, a persistent headache, a shoulder that had been aching for 2 months. She saw each person the same way, completely, without the particular exhaustion that came from wondering how they would react to her methods. At Ironblood Keep, she discovered, people were pragmatic. They came with a problem, and they wanted it solved, and when she solved it, they came back when they had another one. By the end of the second week, the healing wing had a consistent flow of visitors. By the end of the third, it had a queue. Helene appeared in the doorway one afternoon and stood watching the line for a moment before saying, "The previous healer had 3 assistants." "I know," Serafina said, from where she was working at the preparation table. "I've been going through his records. Could you assign me one? Someone steady, who follows instructions precisely. Enthusiasm is secondary. Reliability is what I need." "I'll find you someone," Helene said. The someone turned out to be a quiet girl named Polly, 17, who had been working in the kitchens, and who, Helene explained, had once reorganized the entire spice cabinet without being asked, simply because it had been bothering her. Serafina liked her immediately. She did not need to explain herself twice. She did not ask unnecessary questions. When she was unsure, she said so rather than guessing. These were the qualities Serafina valued most in anyone she worked with. She trained Polly the way Marin had trained her, by question rather than statement, by asking Polly to work out the logic of things rather than simply receiving instructions. It was slower, at first, but the knowledge stuck. Dorian Ashvale came to the healing wing 11 days after her arrival. She heard his footsteps in the corridor before he arrived. She had been learning his footsteps since the first morning at breakfast, the particular measured cadence of them. He knocked at the open door, which she found interesting, as it was technically a common space and knocking was not required. "Come in," she said. He came in, and she heard him stop, taking the room in, as he always seemed to do. "I wanted to see how you were managing," he said. "Well," she said. She was grinding something at the table. She did not stop. "The wing is functional. The supply room is organized. I've seen 43 people in 11 days. Polly is working out." "I've heard," he said. A pause. "Kale's wound is healing cleanly." "I know. He came by 2 days ago to show me." She found herself adding, despite herself, "He's very pleased with the scar." "He would be," Dorian said, and there it was again. That quality of almost amusement, like a door not quite open, but noticeably not closed either. She kept grinding. He did not sit, but he did not leave immediately either. She was beginning to learn that he moved on his own timeline in a way that had nothing to do with discomfort, and everything to do with simply being in no hurry, unless hurry was warranted. "You're reorganizing the preparation system," he said. It wasn't organized in any way that made sense. The previous healer developed a personal system over 11 years that only worked because he was the only person using it. If anything happened to him, no one could have navigated the wing. I've changed it to something anyone could learn in a day.
"That's practical."
"Yes," she said. "I tend to be practical." Another brief silence. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. She thought. She had learned to answer this question directly, rather than deflecting it. 3 more labeling jars. The kind with sealed tops. "And if there's any access to a broader variety of bark medicines, I'd like to expand the pain preparation options. What we have now is limited. I'll speak with the trade convoy's coordinator. We have a supply run next week." "Thank you." He left shortly after. She continued grinding, and thought about the way he had come to see how she was managing, not to inspect or to assert authority or to deliver instructions, but simply to check. The way a person checked on things they cared about continuing to function well. It was, she thought, an interesting quality in an Alpha King. She filed it. Over the following weeks, it became a pattern. He came by the healing wing every few days. Not every day. Not on any predictable schedule. Just often enough that she had stopped being surprised by the sound of his footsteps in the corridor. He asked what she needed. He listened to the answers without appearing to listen but clearly listening, because the things she mentioned always materialized, ordered through Helene or arranged through the trade convoy, or simply placed on her supply shelf without comment. He never stayed long. He never made the visits into anything that required her to perform hospitality or engage with more than the practical content of them. One evening she was working late, later than usual, and he came by and stopped at the door and said, "You haven't been at dinner." "I'm behind on the quarterly stock assessment," she said. "I wanted to finish it." "Finish it tomorrow," he said. "You've been in here since midday." She looked up from what she was doing, or turned her face upward, which amounted to the same gesture. "Are you telling me to stop working?" "I'm suggesting," he said, with the particular precision of a person who understood the difference. "You'll work better on food. Polly brought me a plate 2 hours ago." "I know," she told Helene, who told me. A pause. "Come to dinner. There's a delegation from the Eastern Greywood Pack arriving tomorrow, and the dinner table will be less quiet than it usually is. Consider it useful preparation." She considered whether to argue. The quarterly assessment was important, but she had been at it for hours, and she recognized the quality of her own concentration at this point in the evening. Slightly blunted, not at its best. He was not wrong. "I'll need a moment to put things away," she said. "I'll wait," he said. She put things away with her usual precision, and she followed him to the hall, and she sat at the table and ate, while the household moved around her. And she thought about the fact that the Alpha King of the Ironblood Kingdom had noticed she had missed dinner, and had walked to the healing wing to say so. She thought about this for longer than she would have liked to admit. She had been building a careful internal map of Dorian Ashvale, the same way she built all her maps, by accumulation of detail, by sound and texture, and the patterns of behavior that revealed character more reliably than words. She was beginning to understand the shape of him, quiet but not cold, exacting but not unkind, the kind of person who noticed things and did something about them without making a production of the noticing. She was beginning to understand, with the particular clarity she always had when she stopped telling herself stories and just looked at facts, that she was in danger of something. She sat at the dinner table and ate her food and said very little, and she did not let herself finish the thought. Not yet. There were too many things she did not know, and she had learned long ago that conclusions drawn too early from insufficient information had a way of being very wrong. She would wait. She would keep looking. She would be patient with the map. She had always been patient. It was, she had decided years ago, her greatest strength. She was only beginning to understand that it might also, eventually, be the thing that finally let her be brave. The delegations began arriving at the start of the 6th week. Serafina had prepared for them. She had expanded the healing wing's capacity, cleared the overnight room, tripled the preparation of the most commonly needed medicines for a high-traffic period, and briefed Polly on the additional responsibilities that would come with large numbers of unfamiliar people moving through a single space. She had also, at Dorian's quiet suggestion, attended 2 of the preparatory briefings about the treaty season's political structure, sitting at the back of the council room and listening to things that were not, strictly speaking, her responsibility, but that she had found immediately useful. Understanding the politics of who was attending told her something about the stress levels and likely health presentations of the people she would be treating. Alpha delegations traveled with their tensions packed alongside their formal clothing. She was right. The first week of treaty season brought her 14 cases of stress-related illness, 9 injuries from the training ground where delegation warriors practiced their skills, 2 cases of a respiratory infection she contained quickly by isolating both patients before they mingled with the general population, and 1 case of a young wolf from the northern delegation who was so anxious about his alpha's impression on the proceedings that he had not eaten properly in 4 days. She sent the last one away with a firm instruction to eat 3 meals tomorrow and a bag of dried chamomile, with the instruction to drink it before bed. "You should also tell someone," she said, before he left. "Not me. Someone in your own delegation who can actually address the situation causing the stress." He looked, she assumed, from the quality of the silence, startled. "I'm fine," he said. "You're not fine," she said. "You're depleted. There's a difference. Fine is a baseline. You're below the baseline." He was quiet. "Who is there in your delegation that you trust?" she asked. A longer pause. "My brother is with us." "Talk to your brother," she said. She did not know whether he did. She did not follow up, that was not her place, and she had learned the limits of her role the same way she had learned everything else. But she sent him away with the chamomile, and 3 days later she heard him at the dinner table. A laugh, easy and real, the laugh of someone who had eaten and slept properly for a few days, and she counted that. Dorian came to the healing wing more frequently during treaty season, but his visits shifted in character. They became briefer, more practical, more oriented toward logistics, convoy logistics, delegation arrangements, the 100 small things that a large gathering created. She understood, one of the people he relied on for a clear picture of the current state of the gathering, because sickness and injury were honest indicators of what was actually happening in a group, regardless of what people said publicly. She told him things directly, and he received them directly, and the exchange was efficient and clean, the way their working relationship had become, efficient and clean. And yet, she noticed that his visits lasted longer than the information exchange required. She noticed that he had started sitting, which he had not done in the first weeks, on the stool near the preparation table, not in a way that impeded her work, but in a way that meant he was staying. She noticed that the conversations had begun to drift, occasionally, from logistics into other territories, that he had mentioned, once, a book he had read on the history of trade routes, and had mentioned it in the way of a person sharing something rather than reporting it, and she had said that she had not read it, but that she found the subject interesting, and he had sent the book to the healing wing the next day with a note that Polly read to her. It's better than it sounds from the title. She had Polly read the book aloud to her in the evenings, and she had sent back a note, "You were right, and I have 3 questions about the 3rd chapter." He had come to the healing wing the following afternoon, and they had talked about the 3rd chapter for 40 minutes, which was 40 minutes longer than anything they had previously discussed that was not directly related to the health of someone in the keep. She noticed all of this. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, with patience and precision, not jumping to conclusions, allowing the pattern to become clear through accumulation. The pattern was becoming clear. She was folding dried preparations one morning when Polly said, from across the room, with the careful voice of someone who had been trying to decide for several days whether to say something, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Serafina said. "Does it feel strange, being here? I mean, not in a bad way. I know you came from somewhere else, and I wondered if it felt strange, this being your place now." Serafina considered. She folded a packet of yarrow, with the same precise movements she always used. "At first," she said, "it felt new. I'm not sure strange is the right word. I've spent my whole life learning new spaces. And now?" Polly said. She thought about the map she had built of the keep, not just the corridors and rooms but the sounds of the place, the way it breathed at different times of day, the particular quality of the evening after dinner, when the training ground went quiet, and the only sounds were the guards on the upper walls, and the kitchen finishing its last work, and the wind coming down off the ridge. "Now it feels like somewhere I know," she said. Polly was quiet for a moment. "That's good," she said. "I'm glad." It was a simple thing to say, but Serafina held it. She had not had many people say they were glad she was somewhere. She had been told she was useful. She had been told she was capable. She had been tolerated and managed and, at the end, removed. Being glad was different. She packed the yarrow packet and reached for the next one and let herself, quietly, without making anything of it, be glad too. 2 weeks before the end of treaty season, a fever swept through the lower residential section of the keep. It started quietly, the way these things always started, one person feeling off, then 2, then 5. By the time Serafina had the full picture, it had reached 11 people, and the pattern of it was consistent enough that she knew it was a single source, rather than several unrelated illnesses traveling through a crowded space. She found the source by working backward through the timing of each case, a process that took an afternoon and required her to sit with Polly and go through the records of every person who had visited the healing wing in the previous 5 days and trace their movements through the shared spaces. "The water barrel in the east training yard," she said, when she had it. Polly looked at the notes she had made. "How do you know?" "Because the only people who haven't developed symptoms are the ones who don't use the east training yard, and the only thing the affected people have in common is that they were all in the east yard in the 2 days before the first symptoms appeared." She rose. "Tell Helene the barrel needs to be emptied and cleaned. Tell the kitchen to distribute drinking water from the main stores only, until the yard barrel has been treated, and tell the guard rotation to—" "I'll remember," Polly said, already moving. Serafina had trained her well. She went to the east yard herself and found the barrel by the specific sound it made, a different resonance from a clean container, and she ran her fingers along its rim and found the soft, slightly tacky quality that meant something growing in the wood that should not be there. She treated the existing cases with the appropriate preparations, adjusted the overnight room to hold 3 patients simultaneously, and wrote a short note to Helene on what preventative measures she recommended for the remaining treaty season. She had Polly deliver it. Helene implemented every item within the hour. That evening, Dorian came to the healing wing and sat on the stool by the preparation table and said, 11 cases, identified and contained in under a day. It was the barrel, she said. I know, Helene told me. He paused. I'm told you identified the source by working backward through patient records. It's a standard method for cluster presentations. You look for the common thread. My previous healer, he said carefully, would have treated each case individually and hoped it resolved. That works sometimes, she said, when you have an unlimited supply of patients. This time, the almost amusement became something she could actually hear. A brief, real sound, barely there, a fraction of a laugh that he had not fully contained. She stilled. She had been hearing him approach something like warmth for weeks, in the gradual increments of a person who had learned to be careful with it. She had been watching it with the patience she watched everything, cataloging without reaching. But that sound, that small, genuine, barely contained fraction of him, reached right past her careful mapping and landed somewhere much more direct. She turned back to what she was doing. The cases should resolve in 3 to 4 days, she said. I'll maintain monitoring through the end of treaty season. All right, he said. He stayed for another half hour. They talked about the Greywood Pack's delegation leader, who had presented with a recurring knee complaint that had gone untreated for 2 years because he was too proud to mention it, until it became impossible to ignore. They talked about the treaty itself. She had developed, over the weeks, enough understanding of the political structure to ask useful questions, and he had developed, over the same weeks, enough understanding of her practical mind to appreciate them. They talked about the book, which she had finished. She had 3 more questions about the final chapter. He stayed long after the questions were answered. She knew this. She let herself know it. When he left, she sat in the quiet of the healing wing for a while after, just sitting, which she almost never did. Her wolf was not grieving anymore. It had not been grieving for some time, she realized. She had not noticed the exact moment it had stopped, because grief, when it goes the way it came, slowly, in pieces, until one day you realize the weight of it is just different, lighter. Not gone entirely, but no longer dragging. Her wolf was alert, awake in a way it had not been in a long time, maybe ever, paying attention with its whole self. She pressed her hand against her own chest and felt the steady beat of her own heart, and she thought, all right. All right. She was not going to rush this. She was not going to reach ahead of where she actually was and take hold of something she was not ready for. But she was going to stop pretending she did not know what was happening. That was enough for now. That was the honest beginning of something, and she had learned, more than anything she had ever learned, that honest beginnings were the only kind worth having. The day the Silver Hollow delegation arrived, Serafina smelled them before they reached the main courtyard. Not the pack scent specifically. She had been away long enough for that to have faded from the front of her awareness. But the particular combination of pine resin and cold stone, and the specific herb that grew only in Silver Hollow's eastern meadows, and that its members all carried faintly in their clothes. She was crossing the lower corridor toward the healing wing when the smell reached her, and she stopped. Her wolf stopped. Then she kept walking. She had known that Silver Hollow attended Ironblood Keep's treaty season. She had learned this from the briefing records and had thought about it with the careful steadiness she tried to bring to all difficult things. Acknowledging it, making room for it, continuing. She had not panicked. She had decided, weeks ago, that she would not give Caden Vale's presence in the same building more power over her than his absence had already taken. She was the head healer of Ironblood Keep. She was good at her work. She had built something real here, out of very little. She was not going to be undone by a smell. She went to the healing wing and worked. He came to her on the second day of the delegation's visit. She was alone in the supply room when she heard the footsteps, not Dorian's particular measured cadence, and not Kale's lighter quick step, and not Polly's soft-footed efficiency. These were footsteps she had not heard in 7 weeks, and she knew them instantly, the way you knew the sound of a door that had once closed behind you. Serafina. She turned. She kept her hands at her sides. Alpha Vale, she said. The name felt strange in her mouth, not because she had forgotten it, because it had changed shape since she last said it. It had been a title that carried weight, once, the weight of authority over her life and her future. Now it was just a name. You look well, he said. Thank you, she said. Because it cost nothing, and required nothing. A pause. He moved, or shifted. She heard the small adjustment of weight that meant a person was not comfortable with how something was going. I didn't know you were here, he said. You didn't ask, she said. Not unkindly, just precisely. Serafina. Did you need medical attention? She asked. Or something for someone in your delegation? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I wanted to see you. You're seeing me, she said. Another pause. I handled the situation badly, he said. The words came out with the particular flatness of someone who had practiced saying a thing, and then found, at the moment of saying it, that the practice had not been adequate preparation. The supply room. I should have investigated further before The supplies were found, she said, 3 days after I left. A young wolf in the North Residential Group had taken them to supplement the healing kit he was assembling for his family. She had heard this from a Silver Hollow member at the dinner table the previous evening, who had mentioned it to someone else, and not known she was listening. She kept her voice even. Elder Bram told the pack. He mentioned it in the autumn gathering. Caden was very still. I didn't know that, he said. I assumed you might not, she said. How would you have handled it, if you had known in time? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. She let it be. She had learned patience with silences. I don't know, he said, finally. It was, she thought, more honest than many things he might have said. I appreciate that you said that, she said. It's a more useful answer than the wrong one would have been. I made a mistake, he said. Yes, she said. I would like to. Alpha Vale. She said his name quietly, not with anger, not with the cold flatness of contempt, just clearly. I am not angry with you. I want you to hear that as a real thing, not as a performance of grace. I'm not angry. What happened happened. I have built something here that I am proud of, and I have done it because I was removed from a place that was not giving me enough room. I do not wish you harm. I do not wish your pack harm. A pause. But there is nothing I need from you. And I think what you're looking for, I don't think I'm the right person to give it to you. What you're looking for is something you need to give yourself. He was quiet for a long time. You're different, he said finally. I'm the same, she said. You just know me better now. She heard him move toward the door. Serafina, he said, from the doorway. Yes. I'm glad you're well. It sounded like he meant it. Thank you, she said. Genuinely. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, going away, and she turned back to the supply room and stood with her hands on the shelf and breathed. She had done that well. She was satisfied with how she had done that. She stood for one more moment and then got back to work. She was still working an hour later when Dorian Ashvale appeared in the supply room doorway. She heard him stop and then hold still in the particular way he held still when he was about to say something he had not previously planned to say. He came to the healing wing, Dorian said. Yes, she said. Are you all right? She turned the question over. She asked herself it honestly, the way she asked herself all important things. Yes, she said. He has no authority here, Dorian said. It was a quiet statement, precise, with no inflection that made it a question or a reassurance. Just a fact being offered. I know, she said. I told him so. Not in those words exactly, but the substance. A pause. What did you tell him? She considered. That I was well. That I had built something I was proud of. That I didn't need anything from him. She paused. And that the only person who could give him what he was looking for was himself. Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then, that was generous. It was honest, she said. I don't think it's particularly generous to tell someone the truth about what they actually need. Some people would call it generous, he said. given the circumstances. Some people, she said, confuse generosity with the absence of visible anger. They're different things. He was quiet again. This quiet had a different quality from the others, not thoughtful, not waiting, but the particular stillness of someone listening to what they had just heard, and allowing it to land. Yes, he said, after a moment. They are. She went back to work. He stayed for a little while longer, not saying anything, just present in the way he was sometimes present, as though the healing wing was a place he found it easy to be. And then he left quietly, and she heard his footsteps down the corridor, and she turned the shape of the conversation over in her mind, and let herself, carefully, honestly, think what she was actually thinking. She was thinking that she had come to this place as nothing, exiled, uncertain, with a bag on her back and no destination. She was thinking that she had built herself a life here, piece by piece, the way she had always built everything. She was thinking that the person who had exiled her had stood in her supply room and acknowledged, obliquely but genuinely, that he had been wrong. And she was thinking about the sound of Dorian Ashvale's footsteps stopping in her doorway, and the way he said, "Are you all right?" in a voice that meant he actually wanted to know. She was thinking about these things, and she was being honest with herself, which was the only kind of honest that counted, and she was acknowledging something she had been very carefully not acknowledging for some time. She set down what she was holding and stood still for a moment in the supply room. Then she picked it back up and went back to work, because thinking things was not the same as knowing what to do with them, and she had learned this a long time ago, in a life that had required her to learn nearly everything the hard way, that the right response to clarity was patience. Wait. Keep looking. Let the map become complete before you try to move through it. She was patient. She was not finished building the map, but she was beginning to understand its shape. The last night of treaty season brought rain. It started in the early evening, a low sound on the roof of the healing wing that Serafina heard as she was finishing the final preparations inventory of the season, and by the time she walked to the main hall for dinner, it had become a proper storm, the kind that moved in off the ridge and settled, deliberate and soaking, into all the spaces of the keep. Dinner was quieter than usual. The treaty signing had taken place that afternoon in the formal reception hall, and there was the particular deflation that came after significant events. People still present, still in the same place, but with the thing they had been building toward already behind them. The Silver Hollow delegation had sat at the far end of the table. Serafina had been aware of them without directing her attention toward them, which was the correct relationship to have with a thing that was present but irrelevant. Caden Vale had not spoken to her again after their conversation in the supply room. She had not expected him to. She had not wanted him to. The matter between them was, she had decided, settled. Not resolved in the sense of being made good, but settled in the sense of being completed. She understood it. She was done carrying it. After dinner she went to the healing wing, and sat in the workroom, not working, just sitting. This was unusual for her, and she noticed it. She had the feeling of someone waiting for something without knowing quite what they were waiting for, and she had learned to respect that feeling rather than dismiss it, because it had been right more often than she would have expected. The footsteps came at the 7th bell, measured and certain, and she heard them turn toward the healing wing corridor, rather than toward the upper residence stairs, and she sat still and waited. He stopped at the workroom door. "You're not working," he said. "No," she said. "Good." He came in and sat on the stool. She heard him settle, and then the rain, which was louder now, and the sound of the keep around them. Then he said, "The last Silver Hollow delegate left an hour ago." She did not say anything. She had learned to read his pauses well enough to know this was not the end of what he was saying. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Then ask it," she said. A pause that was different from his other pauses, longer, with more weight in it. She heard him breathe, a careful breath, the breath of a person taking a measured step. "You have been here for 6 weeks," he said. "You have built something here that will outlast the current treaty season, and the next one, and the one after that. You have changed the healing wing. You have changed the way this household understands what a healer can be." He paused. "I have been watching you do it." "I know," she said quietly. "I know that you know," he said, and she could hear, in those 4 words, something she had not heard from him before. Not the almost amusement, not the careful warmth, but something more direct than either. I know you're aware of what happens in a room. I know you've been paying attention to more than the supply room. She said nothing. I would like, he said, carefully, with the particular precision of someone who had chosen every word, to ask you whether what you've observed has included anything you would like to say directly. Because I find that I have things to say directly, and I would rather know before I say them whether you are in any part of the same place. She sat very still. She was thinking about the walk from Silver Hollow, with her mother's stick in her hand and no destination. She was thinking about Marin's cottage, and the smell of lemon balm. She was thinking about the first night at Ironblood Keep, and the way the place had felt large and alive and real. She was thinking about 11 weeks of building something from almost nothing. She was thinking about a man who had knocked at an open door because it was her space, and he did not assume he had the right to enter it. I have observed, she said, carefully, in return, that you are a person who pays attention to things other people overlook. That you say what you mean, and mean what you say. That you are fair in the ways that actually matter, not the performative ones. That you are someone whose presence I have not, at any point in the past 6 weeks, found anything other than exactly what I needed it to be. A pause. And that there are things I have been very deliberately not allowing myself to finish thinking, because I was not sure they were ready to be finished. The rain was loud against the windows. He moved. She heard him rise from the stool, and she turned toward the sound, and she heard him cross the 2 steps between them, and then he stopped. Are they ready now? He asked. She turned his question over. She was honest with herself, which was the only kind of honest that counted, and she asked herself whether she was ready, and the answer was clear, had been clear for some time, had been waiting with patience while she confirmed it from every angle. Yes, she said. He took her hand. Both of his hands, wrapped around one of hers, carefully, completely, the way you held something you intended to keep safe. She felt the shape of his hands, and the warmth of them, and the particular quality of his grip, which was the grip of someone who had decided something, and was not uncertain about it. She felt her wolf rise up through her, not in grief or warning, but in the direct and certain way of something being recognized. Not the false start of an exiled girl standing in Silver Hollow and hearing her name called across a hall. Something real. Something built from weeks of knowledge and honesty, and the slow, patient work of 2 people paying full attention to each other. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and I want you to hear it, without rushing past it. All right, she said. You are the most complete person I have ever known, he said. Not in spite of anything. Not despite any circumstance of your life. Because of the entirety of it. Every part of it. The parts that were given, and the parts you built, and the parts you survived. And I have known, for some time, that what I feel for you is not admiration, though I do admire you. It is not gratitude, though I am grateful. It is something else entirely, and I am asking, not expecting. I am asking whether you would be willing to let me say so, and have you hear it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I heard it, she said. He moved again, not away from her, but closer, and she heard the quiet, careful movement of him, and she lifted her free hand and found his face by touch, reading it, the way she read everything, by the truth that fingers found when eyes could not. She found the angle of his jaw, the careful line of his cheekbone, the stillness of a person who had decided to hold still for whatever came next. She read him completely. And what she read was someone who was not performing, someone who had no interest in performing, someone who was standing, in the most literal possible sense, exactly as he was. Outside, the rain fell against the stone of Ironblood Keep, and it fell on the courtyard where the last of the delegations had dispersed, and it fell on the long road that led away south toward Silver Hollow, where a convoy moved through the dark. Inside the healing wing, 2 people who had each spent a long time learning that the only thing worth trusting was honesty, stood in the warmth of it, and held on. Yes, she said, to all of it, to the words he had said, and the ones he had not needed to say, and the ones she had been saving up without knowing quite who she was saving them for. Yes. Her wolf stood silver and steady in the permanent dark they shared. Not grieving, not small, not tucked away behind her ribs where nothing could reach it. Standing. Exactly as it had always been meant to stand. And below the keep, in the last wagon of the Silver Hollow convoy, Caden Vale sat with his hands on his knees, and the rain loud on the canvas above him, and said nothing at all. He was not a man who deceived himself for long. He was beginning to understand what he had held, and what he had set down, and the understanding was not comfortable. He would carry it, the way people carried things they had done when they were limited and afraid, and had not known what they were choosing. He would learn from it. He would have to. That was the only thing left available to him. The convoy moved on through the rain and the dark. At Ironblood Keep, the storm settled, and the fire burned in the Healing Wing workroom, and the keep breathed around two people who had each built themselves from nothing, and had found, in the building, that they were building toward the same thing. Neither of them was in a hurry. They had both learned the same lesson, in their very different lives, by very different roads. The things worth having were worth the time it took to be certain of them. They were certain. They were exactly where they were. And that, finally, was enough.